It is the first day of early voting for the March primary. Everything you need to know before you cast your ballot, that's coming your way in just a few minutes on Capital Coffee Talk.
They need to be held accountable.
Decibel.
Ben Philpott from KUT.
And, you know, every week we talk about mugs. Because it's Capital Coffee Talk, and I had to bring
Capital empty mug coffee
videographer
talk.
Joe Roach's mug, because if I saw it on his desk, it's apropos for today. I voted early. Spider-Man
I thought
voted
maybe you were
early.
Spider-Man.
No,
you voted
I left
early.
my Spider-Man costume at home today. But anyway, I had to say that. Today is the first day of early voting, and that's
right,
what we want
it
to
is.
focus on today, the March primary, and the fact that it's the very first primary in the entire country. So a lot of eyes going to be on the Texas primary to see how people vote, how many people vote, and how they vote.
People were very interested in what was happening in Virginia and Pennsylvania, and not Pennsylvania, rather Virginia and New Jersey, and then of course the special election, the Senate race in Alabama. People will be watching here because it's the first primary, although not that kind of action quite yet. We have to wait till the general election to actually go head-to-head Republican-Democrat. But figuring out maybe which flavor of Republican or Democrat gets some of the nominations will give us some idea about the fall.
And in many cases, especially due to gerrymandering, a lot of these races are decided in the primary. So if you
That's
don't vote in the primary, you may not really have a voice in deciding who's going to represent you. So remember that before you decide to sit out until November.
I think it was Harvey Kronberg, owner and runner of the Quorum Report, a political newsletter here in Austin and around Texas. He said this years ago that it's the Republican primary and that's it. So like Governor Greg Abbott was elected by 800,000 Texans. That's the margin that he had his first time running for governor. And of course, once he won the nomination, easily won the general election.
So remember that.
So remember that.
It's important to vote in the primary, and it's March the 6th. But early voting starts today, and we have our guest today is Cinde Weatherby, who is with the League of Women Voters of Austin. Thanks so much for joining us today.
It's a great pleasure to be here with both of you. Thanks.
So your job is to help educate people about what's at stake in these elections and what they're voting on. Tell us about your organization and its role during the primary.
Well, our role during every election year, which is every year, several times a year, is to inform the public in a very nonpartisan and comprehensive way. Because we've been around since 1919, coming up on our centennial year next year.
So you were around before women actually had the right to vote?
We were the women who got the right to vote. And men. There were men involved in that too.
Yes, there were. A few.
And men who listened to their wives, like Governor Hobby, who his wife was Ovida Culp Hobby, and she was a strong-willed, very intelligent woman as well. But anyhow, I digress. We've been around since we did get the 19th Amendment passed. Actually, the League of Women Voters started in Austin before it did nationally, because those suffragettes got together and decided they would have a League of Women Voters when we passed that 19th Amendment in Texas, thanks to Governor Hobby. And then once the 19th Amendment was passed nationally, we helped the National League get started.
We're always at the forefront of everything in Austin.
Yeah.
Okay, March 6th primary coming up, early voting today. What can people do to find out about what they're voting on and who they're voting for?
Well, the first thing I want to say is everybody should vote in the primary, because you've just mentioned that the primary is what starts the whole election process, and it's it travels along throughout the year. We'll be voting a couple more times. A lot of people don't identify as Republicans and Democrats. They haven't. Many of them that are now active today haven't identified as any voter. So there are a lot of new voters out there, and they need a lot of help and information. And I'm so happy to see all the media really coming along and giving them that. So your show and many others are really making an effort to call attention to the primary, because this is where all the action is.
And we've said before that essentially Texas has about a third that self-identify, because there's no party registration, a third that self-identify as Republican, a third that self-identify as Democrats, and a third that say they're independent. And of course, again, remember, you don't have to register with anybody. There is no party registration. You think you're a Libertarian or a Green Party or independent, you can absolutely pick either the Democrat or Republican primary to vote in.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a big misconception because it's not that way in other states, some other states.
Right, we have so many
It
people
differs
moving
state
to
to
the
state. Yeah, and there is a lot of confusion, and that's one of the things that the League of Women Voters really prides itself at, is making sure that people understand the system in Texas. You know, we work to get people registered too, and we have a lot more people registered than there were last year or the year before that. There's just a tremendous amount of excitement about issues and activism, and I guess what I'd say is, you know, all those people that marched, for whatever reason that is, they marched because they felt something emotionally about that. Mm-hmm. They connected with that issue, and there's not one of those issues that aren't affected by those leaders that we're going to be electing and selecting in this primary and the rest of the year.
And I think that one of the outgrowths of the Women's March, for example, is that there are more female candidates than ever before in a primary race, in a midterm election in general across the country, but right here in Texas. So again, marching is wonderful, but if you want to really make your voice heard, go vote.
Absolutely. And it couldn't be easier than here in Travis and Williamson counties. You can vote at any location during early voting, any location on election day. I'm not sure how broadly your show goes out along there. That's not, you know, it varies county to county because, as you've heard many times, all the rules are different county by county.
I mean, we actually looked that up today. There's about 50 counties that allow you to vote anywhere you want at any polling place on election day. All the counties allow for voting at the different places during early voting, but about 50 that allow on election day. And yeah, we're very lucky that Travis, in fact, Travis was one of the pilot counties that very first started it, and it makes it so easy.
And you guys at KUT have a list today. I know that you did a story where everybody can vote in the various counties, including Travis County.
Yep, we've got up the 6 counties that kind of make up the listening and viewing area here in Central Texas, and have all the polling places listed and all their times and everything, and of course then links back to those county courthouses or county election divisions if you have some additional questions you need to ask.
So once you get to the polls, I guess that we want to talk about 2 things. We want to talk about 411, and we also talk about what you need when you get to the polls. But let's talk about the 411 project.
Well, I want to tell you first, you know, what the League does to inform people is both in Spanish and in English. We approach every one of those people who are running for a race that's got a competitor. You know, we don't get questions from the non-opposed, but for each of those, we ask the same set of questions for every race. So you can look at our full voter's guide, which is available on our website, lwaustin.org, in all the libraries, and also if you go to the website, there's a list of other places you can pick that up too. But you can look at all the questions for each of those candidates and decide which one of those you really align with before you go and decide which primary you're going to vote in. That would be my suggestion.
And again, your group is nonpartisan, so this is just the facts on each of these candidates.
We actually have a way that you can retrieve your personal ballot and all the information about just those candidates, so you don't have to look at all the other districts. Because as you know, you're voting on your state representative, your senator, and the voter's guide has got all of those for everybody.
And you can do that at vote411.org. Also at KUT's webpage, we've got their app loaded up on our page, and you can just type in your address, and you know there's a ballot you can get there.
So it's vote411.org is where people can go to get a copy of this and just find out more information.
Get their personalized ballot. People have asked me, well, how do you get all this information? How do you ask those questions? Do you go to each of them and interview them? No.
You need an army of people to do that.
Right. Our League of Women Voters of the United States, which is headquartered in Washington, provides us with this electronic platform to collect answers to our questions. Local leagues and state leagues devise questions they think are important to their own constituents here in this area. And then we send a link to each of the candidates with a code just for them that they type in their own answers into that system. So that's what you're retrieving when you're going to our vote411.org. They sort
All
that
that
all out by your
research and
personal
information.
ballot, and you see all the things that you'd see if you were to look at a written copy or a full online copy on our website.
And not everyone responds. Has that gotten worse
It
in the
seems
years
like
as
it's
the kind of
gotten
the partisanship?
better
Oh, really?
sometimes.
Yeah, that's
You know, it just sort of varies
Yeah.
from time to time.
What else do you think is important? We're starting early voting today. What do you think are some of the misconceptions that you'd like to clear up? And I know that you've been talking about these in your Texas Decides
Been
2018 answering questions, but there are a lot of misconceptions, particularly surrounding the March primary. Anything you think that you want people to understand about it?
Well, it's where you get to choose. You know,
Yeah.
you've marched on your issues, and now you need to go to the polls and decide who you think should be running. A lot of people who've put off going to vote just until November have given up their right to choose. I mean, they're given the choice that somebody else has made from them. At least if you get involved in the primary, you help narrow that pool down. But there are quite a few races that we are seeing here where there is no incumbent for the first time in decades.
Right, there's
And
so
that
many
means
congressional
that there
retirements this year.
And those are very important positions. You know, those are the people that you really need to
And
get
there's
to
a
if
big
you're
crowd of
interested in
candidates
these
running
things.
because it's so rare
I
to
think
have a
there's
Congress.
21, 22 in one of the
Yep.
congressional
Yep.
districts,
There's
18 in the
Republicans.
Republican
Yep.
primary.
Yep.
So that's why it's so helpful to read and compare and contrast and see who really aligns with you, what you
This
feel
is a
the
variety of
position is.
candidates in some of those races that have very disparate viewpoints on issues, key issues.
And you can be sure that there will be a runoff May the 22nd, and there'll be
Yeah.
early voting before that too, and you can decide between the best two that were chosen. And as I think you had mentioned earlier, the number of people who've been turning out on those elections slides down, and that's why, you know, the people who are leaders of our state offices right now were chosen in a late primary because it got pushed forward because of some court cases. And then the runoff election had just the lowest of the lowest of the lowest. So
Yeah, they always
it's
do.
small fraction of the people in this state elected who was going, or selected who was going to be in the final November election.
So you go to the polls.
Or-
Final question: what do you need to bring?
You need to, one, I want to caution you, you can't just take your phone into the polls because phones aren't allowed in the voting booth. You need to have in your mind who you think you're going to vote for, and that's why it's so important to get your own personal ballot, because you can mark that out, study it, and have it prepared for you to go in and mark your ballot. It's going to be in the same order even that your ballot occurs. So you go online to
Kind of a
vote
cheat sheet,
411.
sort of.
It is your cheat
right.
sheet. But the other thing I'd say is if you forgot to do that, but you'd picked off some of the top things that were important to you, don't just mark somebody. I mean, it's not you don't get graded for completeness on your ballot. If you don't know somebody, just skip that race.
And go
There's
to the
no
next
harm,
one.
no foul. Go to the next one.
And photo ID.
And photo ID, you do have to bring one of your photo IDs if you have them. You've got that list on
Yeah.
your website. It's on our website. It's
There's about
your
5
drivers,
or 6
there's
official, 7 official ones, and then
official
there
ones.
are a handful that you can use if you are willing to sign a piece of paper that says you could not get any of those 7 by normal measures.
Right,
So,
and there are very legitimate reasons for that too. So you have that opportunity, and you do have to bring something that identifies who you are, a current utility bill,
paychecks.
paychecks. You know, there are things that are easy to find.
So it's really hard to have an excuse not to vote in the March primary. You have this long period where there's places all over town where you can vote early. So
And
Go
they're
vote.
normally in a place that you're going to be going by anyway.
yeah, the grocery store.
Yeah, you'll see these big signs outside that say vote here. In fact, you probably don't even need to go to the website to find out what the polling place is closest to you, because if you get around
drove
in
past it.
town, you've just driven past one.
Yeah, there's so many.
The supermarket, you know, I was talking with a group of folks the other day. They're going to sort of go vote together as a group, people that actually went in some marches together, and then vote, and they've selected a a nice happy hour after that.
Make it fun, right? Doesn't
Voting
have,
should be fun.
it should be fun, and it is
It's
our
culmination of something you've been thinking about for a long time, and now it's here, and you really get to be a part of that decision.
well,
and-
it is our right.
And don't be upset if the person that you voted for doesn't win, because you've indicated who you are interested in, and the other people will begin to pay attention to you too. There are a lot
Starting-
more people voting.
Yeah, and it's starting to make your voice heard in many different ways. So, thank you, Cinde Weatherby, for
Well,
giving
thank
us some
you.
insight on this first day.
And
of
thank you so
early
much
voting.
for calling attention to this issue. It's really gratifying to see the local media providing so much great information. Of course, I'm also glad that it includes vote411.org and
Good website.
and our
Gotta
League of
include it.
Women Voters local website, lwvaustin.org. So
You got in all the information for
Yeah.
us. Thank you so much.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
All right, and we'll probably be checking back in with you in November.
okay.
Thank you, Cinde. We also want to spend some time today talking about the aftermath of that deadly Florida shooting last week. The country's really still reeling. 17 people dead at that high school in Florida. A new Washington Post ABC News poll came out today, and one of the things it says is a majority of Americans blame Congress and the president for not doing more to prevent that mass shooting. At the same time, that same survey found more Americans also believe mass shootings are due more to mental health issues than the need for stricter gun laws. So many issues surrounding guns and legislation. We wanted to bring in a reporter who's been doing a lot of investigative work on those very issues, Alain Stevens with the Texas Standard. Thanks for coming on Capitol Coffee Talk.
Thanks for
today.
having me.
Tell us about your mug. We always
Oh,
have to talk
this
a
is
little
a
bit about the mug.
Reveal mug. I was a Reveal investigative fellow.
Reveal is?
Reveal is a national podcast that specializes in radio investigative reports. So I was doing a report on guns, out of all things, this long investigation on guns.
So we're glad you brought your reveal. You revealed your mug today.
You can't actually
Yeah.
see the words, but if there was hot water
If there's
in
hot
there-
water in
It's
it,
one of those
it
cool ones
reveals
that- yeah.
itself.
I get it.
Very
I love
cool,
it.
yeah.
Yeah, it actually beats Spider-Man in the coolness factor today. Okay, set the stage for us. First of all, we've had, every time there's one of these mass shootings, we hear thoughts and prayers, and then people say, no, we need more than thoughts and prayers, we need action. So where are we when it comes to some of these measures working their way through the legislative process?
Well, we're kind of in a difficult position. After Sutherland Springs, Senator John Cornyn put this Fix NICS Act bill together. And NICS referring to the National Instant Criminal Background Check System. So for Sutherland Springs, that shooter slipped through the cracks, purchased a weapon, even though he had a criminal background, and he shouldn't have. And that kind of pointed to all of these holes within the background checking system as it stands. This bill, the idea was to force federal organizations, federal law enforcement entities to put these background checks into place so they would pop up and prevent people from getting guns who aren't supposed to have them. And then it would put a financial incentive for states, for those organizations to put background checks into the background checking system as well. This is something that is kind of came up recently because on Friday, President Trump said he is, open to this idea.
He's now more
and
on board to consider
he's
some
more
of
on
these
board
things.
with this, to consider some of these things. Right now, though, it's at the Senate Judiciary Committee, but they haven't voted on it yet. There is a House bill that's very similar, has some of these provisions that has a little bit more traction, but this is something
They're
that
still both in committee?
so the House bill actually passed, I
Okay.
believe, but John Cornyn's bill still hasn't gotten much traction. It's supposed to be this bipartisan bill, though a lot of Democrats are
Right.
interested in it too. We're now, with this going on, though, about 4,000 names have been added on to the background check system. The Department of Defense started adding in some of their criminal records into the checking system to try to prevent this from happening in the first place, because if you don't have the criminal backgrounds in the system, there's nothing to check it against, and people can get guns.
So AR-15.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that.
Which
So
is the next thing, yeah.
this young man, Mr. Cruz, I'm forgetting his first name. Lorenzo?
That's all right. He doesn't.
Okay.
We don't need
okay.
to talk about
All
it.
right. Okay.
This-
Nicholas
this
Cruz.
Nicholas,
murderer.
thank
Nicholas
you.
Cruz.
Nicholas Cruz. was able to purchase some pretty serious firearms.
Yeah, so reports are coming out saying that he bought 7 firearms in the last year. They believe all of these were rifles. And one of the things that keeps coming up is this AR-15. Why is this the weapon that's the kind of preferred weapon for mass shooters? And the kind of answer to that is pretty interesting. You know, first of all, it's just a very popular weapon, but recently we've seen skyrocketing sales when it comes to just guns in general. The AR-15 has started entering the civilian market in about the 1980s when the patent opened up and allowed these third-party manufacturers to produce these for the civilian market. They still really weren't that popular until after the 1994 federal assault weapons ban expired in 2004. After that, we see this kind of explosion in weapon sales, and that includes the AR-15, and it's for these 3 kind of reasons. So after a ban happens, what do? Well, you go out after that ban kind of expires. Everyone rushes out to go get what was once unavailable. So we kind of see a spike in sales from that. And then we have the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan is going on, and that military technology starts kind of trickling down. Some of the accessories, some of the improvements on the rifle, and now the civilian market says we can get this rifle, and it's a much better rifle than it was before. And the third thing is that we have the Obama administration. So people have these fears that if there is a ban under the last Democratic president, this one may institute a similar ban, so get it while the getting's good. This creates this huge spike in weapon sales. And to kind of give an example, in 2005, the FBI said that they would process about 8 million background checks for people purchasing weapons. Last year, that number was 25 million.
25 million?
25 million. The ATF says that between 2005 and 2015, there'd be 33,000 new licensed gun dealers added to the market. So we have more gun stores, we have more weapon sales, and that includes that AR-15 rifle. So there's just a lot of them out there.
So when we're talking about this particular case, one of the things that came to light was this guy was kind of on the radar, Nicholas Cruz. He had done some things and said some things on social media that raised a red flag, but he kind of fell through that crack, and that the word didn't get to the Florida FBI?
Right, the Miami field office. So the question for this particular shooting is this one about intelligence, because someone called into the FBI tip line and that information wasn't properly relayed to the Miami Field Division, and they were unable to kind of investigate that tip further. And part of that is due to the consolidation of the FBI's tip line. The FBI's tip line really kind of grew to prominence in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. It was used to call in possible waste and fraud from FEMA, from FEMA payouts. They had call lines at like 56 branches across the United States. They decided they wanted less people on the phones and more of their agents out on the street, so they would consolidate it to one tip line that was in West Virginia. And 98% of their calls they say they can't act on. So it's a lot of phone calls, but they just didn't have the manpower to really kind of follow through on the investigations.
I think it's I'm sorry, go ahead.
No,
I think it's important to point out that some people have talked about that he had made some threats, had said some things online, but in reality, in terms of background checks and what gets flagged and what could keep you from purchasing a gun, where does saying something a little off on YouTube kind of fall into that?
Right, and that's kind of the line a lot of people are asking about, is that you get so much information. What's the difference between intelligence and then actionable intelligence? Something that crosses that line that says, listen, we need to go ahead and dig a little bit further. I was talking with a ATF source that I have, and he kind of posed this interesting idea saying, perhaps the agency could start kind of working these like they do their cold case files. That they could take retired agents, put them on a part-time contract that keeps the cost real low, and that they will simply monitor social media. That they can monitor and say, okay, we see a threat, now let's take it one step further, because they have years of experience. Let's take it one step further. Let's see the purchase history. If someone makes a threat and they don't have a purchase history, maybe that's something we don't want to follow through on. If someone makes a threat and they do have a purchase history, maybe we should go ahead and start taking the next investigative step to kind of flag.
Some more eyes and ears.
Yeah, more eyes and ears.
But there have been a lot of talk about increasing mental health awareness or whatever in terms of this. But my understanding is that you have to have some kind of an official diagnosis before
Correct.
that's going to keep you on a put you
Correct.
on a no-buy list.
Correct.
And people saying, "Oh yeah, this guy's crazy," doesn't mean he couldn't.
That's absolutely correct. Signs that someone is depressed, and a lot of times we do this as kind of kind of like Monday morning quarterback. That's very easy for us to come back and say, yeah, friends and family said that there are a bunch of red flags
He
here.
was a quiet man. Yeah.
Exactly. But when it comes to kind of stopping someone from purchasing weapons, the government has a very solid line that they say, listen, you have rights to purchase a weapon. You need to have something that's documented, something that's very credible that should stop you from purchasing these weapons. If you don't have that, we can't kind of go by assumptions. We can't go by just, neighbors saying, well, he seemed sad today, so you need to investigate him.
Has anything really changed since Sutherland Springs? Because I know you did a lot of investigative reporting surrounding that particular shooting. Has anything changed much since that shooting between then and now?
The only thing that I could say that has really changed, and you hear a lot of these conversations and they seem to kind of stall out. The only thing right now that's changed is the Department of Defense is definitely on board with trying to put their background check information in there. Like I said, 4,000 new names added into the checking system for people who are dishonorably discharged. We're also seeing stuff happen at a local level. More city police departments are saying, okay, we have lists of people who have domestic violence convictions. We need to go out and make sure that these people don't have weapons. If they have weapons and they indicated they had weapons, and they have a domestic violence conviction, we need to go out and get those guns, do gun retrievals. So a lot of stuff involving, the kind of conversation right now is enforce the laws that are already in place before we add new ones. And that's kind of what I'm seeing from like the law enforcement community right now.
I think just one more important point to add is everything we're talking about here today or a lot of what we're talking about today, and the bill that Senator Cornyn is talking about are the official background checks that are done at a retail store.
Yeah, at a federally licensed gun.
But not
What percentage of gun sales are on the secondary market? Gun shows out of the back of somebody's car.
So we don't know, and so when we're talking about all these laws, and that's absolutely correct, we're talking about a small sliver of these are the licensed, essentially purchases that come from gun stores. The secondary market's completely unregulated, and there's almost no way of knowing the person-to-person transfers of firearms that go on every day. There's no way to really kind of know how guns are transporting. The ATF has certain ways that they can track that. For instance, after every major shooting, they're going to run a tracing report. That tracing report is going to track it from the manufacturer to the point of a crime. And even they have told me that this is a very difficult process for them, that they come into a lot of dead ends, that even when they're in the tracing procedure, they only have about 60% accuracy. And the reason why is that secondary market, those hand-to-hand transfers, are so hard to track. There's also a lot of information coming out talking about that Texas is leading as far as the guns that are moving down to Mexico and into the hands of cartels. And a lot of that is because that secondary market is unregulated, that they're worried about what they call the straw purchaser. You can buy a gun legitimately. I can say Ben here in a parking lot, buy that gun, cash, no background checks are done, and I can move that weapon to Mexico. I could sell that weapon. And then also, because there's 33,000 new gun stores, the ATF is saying that they are seeing a national increase in gun store break-ins. So there are more people, more gun stores, more gun store thefts. Those guns, when they enter in the market, have no paperwork whatsoever. And they're finding these guns left and right. They actually aggressively pursue these guns because a stolen weapon, they say, is kind of more likely to be used in a serious crime.
So do you think, final question, do you think with this particular incident and the number of students now so vocally calling for gun control measures, do you think that's going to make a difference? I know you're a reporter and you don't need to really have an opinion, but you've been studying this issue a long time, so what is your gut on that?
I think that this is something that, unfortunately, every party is kind of, and when I say every party, I don't mean political party. I mean, there's so many different groups that have so many different voices on the matter. I think younger people right now are asking for a measure that can control the actual firearm. They're looking for magazine capacity restrictions. They're looking for restrictions on the AR-15. When I talk to law enforcement, they're hearing a completely different message. What they're worried about is the aggregate crime. And the way they see it is that 60% of the guns used in crimes are handguns. Only 13% are rifles. So when they kind of look at the day-to-day shootings, that's their kind of big priority. So until I start kind of feeling that law enforcement is really concerned about these mass shootings the way they are about the aggregate crime, I just don't know how this is going to play out. I think in the long term, 10, 20 years down the line, I think some of these measures limiting AR-15s and magazine capacities may go into an effect, but right now, I think law enforcement is concerned about that aggregate death and about that intelligence.
Fascinating information. Thank you so much, Alain Stevens, for the Texas Standard. We'll bring you back on in a couple of months and get an update from you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.
And we also want to talk about March 2nd. That's the last day to early vote.
Yes, last day to early vote.
Yeah, so we have until March 2nd to go vote.
And then after that, you have to wait until March 6th. If you're in Travis County, lucky you can vote anywhere on March 6th. If you're in Williamson County, the same thing. Some of our surrounding counties no, although also some of our surrounding counties are small. And if it's really interesting, in doing this web post we had up this morning, Blanco County has 2 places you can go vote during early voting. That's it.
Just 2?
One in Blanco, one in Johnson City. And I think the Blanco one is only open on the weekend in between the first and second week of early
different
voting.
counties have different opportunities.
Different populations, different opportunities. But if you have any questions, if you're catching this somewhere else in the state, just Google your county elections and it'll pop up, and you can ask. You can figure out stuff there.
And you can also look at your candidate's position on gun restrictions too, because that's something that people can do if they feel passionately one way or the other about these issues. They need to find out what the candidate stands for and vote that way.
That's right. Be educated and be a voter.
That's right. Make your voice heard. Thanks so much for being with us today. We'll be back next Tuesday at 12:30. We're here every week for Capital Coffee Talk. And next week we're going to bring in some folks who are trying to get the business community more involved and getting out there and getting the word out to them through their businesses to get people to the polls. So we'll see you next week. Try to stay dry out there. It's kind of a messy day out there. See you next week. Thank you.
And then 2 weeks from now, you'll be at KUT.